Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I want to thank everyone at the Atlanta Soda Zen Center. Good to see you, Hoju-san. Fusats, thank you for facilitating, and many others for facilitating this, because you keep this going week in and week out, and I really appreciate that. So, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. Yeah, as Fusatsu mentioned, we had decided on a topic, which is always timely, but of course, recent events have shined a light on this even more acutely. So we'll talk about that a little bit, of course, but I just want to say again, I'm really happy to connect with everyone there, and it's a great joy and honor to do this. So I'm going to get my situation here. So again, yeah, my topic is hearing the cries of the world, Kannon, Bodhisattva, and Metta. The reason why I chose this, one of the prime reasons, was that this is an area of practice that I've been really trying to dig deeper into in the last few years. And there's going to be some relation to the ritual, but really it just really boils down to our Zazen practice, as it usually does. So so recalling deeply and investigating the activity of the Bodhisattva known as Kannon has been a theme for a while, in how I speak with the Sangha lately. So just a little background. Many of us know already, but for clarity, Kannon, also known as Kanzan or Guanyin in Chinese, Avalokiteshvara in Sanskrit, among other names in different cultures. But what occurred to me when I was preparing this talk, and I want to highlight this, is that a relationship with this Bodhisattva is already established by the virtue of our practice and our vows. I think that's important to understand and to feel. So, and this is a done deal. This is what we do in our practice. So I gave a similar talk before on Kannon Bodhisattva, but it's going to be changed, especially given current situation. So it's that those events have really shaped the tenor of this talk presently, and I like to bring in some of these conditions. So, without beating around the bush, we all know what is happening in Eastern Europe with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. It's of course a perilous time for the Ukrainians, a life and death, literally, situation, and it's unsettling for the world. I was talking to a friend yesterday about this and other matters, and the way he put it, which I really liked, was, and this relates to our Kannon theme and interdependence as well, but I'll bring that in later. But what he said was, we have, when something of such import and such magnitude and consciousness is happening in some other part of the world, we feel that as well. We definitely feel that. There's no getting around that. So that's why we see the outpouring of sympathy as we do, which is a great thing. That's heartening to see that. What I'd also like to say is bring in a term called Saha, or Saha world. This word Saha refers to the place where all conditioned phenomena exist, where all beings are subject to the cycle of birth and death, where good and evil manifests, and where beings must practice patience and endurance. This is also the place where the Buddha teaches and where the Buddha lives. This is our world. This is our existence. As it happens, in this Saha world, war is happening all the time. And I want to give my support to the people of Ukraine, but I also want to encourage in myself and others a remembrance of all the suffering going on. If one were to put, current wars in Google or your favorite search engine, you'd get sobering information. So I totally understand why Ukraine is a very acute and an event of such magnitude. I also would like to remember the people of Sudan, Somalia, Egypt, Ethiopia, Afghanistan, Palestine, Iraq, Iran, Israel, Turkey, Armenia, Myanmar, Colombia, Haiti. Thank you for taking that in. That's only a partial list. But I really want to honor this Bodhisattva who saves all beings without discrimination. So that was an important piece of what I wanted to say today. And thank you for taking that in. So, but if we want to look at this Bodhisattva, Kannon, I'm just going to use that appellation. Although we know from the Heart Sutra, we just chanted Avalokiteshvara. But what I'd like to explore in the Kannon Sutra that we chant regularly is it's a good chant because it's shorter in form, and if you have the inclination to memorize chants, I highly recommend this one because of its short length. And we didn't chant that today, but you're probably familiar with this. I'll go through it in a moment. But what I find powerful is chanting it completely, wholeheartedly, without, from myself, without an intermediating factor, such as a text. That's not always possible, nor is it, required to memorize, of course. But there is something really visceral about just chanting with your ears and with your heart and with the moment and the whole Sangha. But it's okay. I mean, it's okay to read the liturgy too. I wouldn't say that it isn't okay, but because I'm also a musician and my colleagues, a lot of them also read scores and lead sheets in order to perform. So there's no hindrance there. Some musicians are, once they memorize or familiar with a piece enough, they don't need to rely on the score, depending on how complex it is. But seeing that we're dealing with, if we have a shorter chant and it's of a monotone nature, we might have a chance there. So I recommend that if you're able. So when doing the Kannon chant, I feel it manifesting as a continuous practice of Zazen, like sharing this in audible format. It's a wholehearted activity, and nothing is held back. So this can apply to any of the chants, not just Kannon Sutra, but we have a treasure storehouse of chants that we were able to use. So I recall how chants have had deep meaning for me as a practitioner for many years. And again, coming from my musical background, which factors in this, but one doesn't need to be a musician to appreciate this, or music or sound in general, of course. I think how I experience it is that it affects sound and music and chants, or just sound in general, it affects us at a most primordial level. And so music, chants have deep meanings that go beyond the intellect. So I'm going to talk for a little while, but please, if you have any questions or comments, and at an opportune time, feel free to raise your hand, and I'll try to look out for that. So the meaning of the name, I'll go back to the Sanskrit Avalokiteshvara, which are Kannon and Kanzan and Guanyin were derived from ultimately. But in Sanskrit, the definition I found, or the translation I found for Avalokiteshvara, svara is the part of the name that means sound or even noise. The whole name means sound perceiver, and or literally one who looks down upon sound, and that is looks down upon the cries of sentient beings who need help. But whatever the name, they are all expressions of mercy, compassion, and loving kindness. So in the version that we chant the form 7 times through, and we alternate between English and the transliterated Japanese. And I especially appreciate the building of energy and tempo over the course of these repetitions. And this really evokes strong intention to reach out in all directions. So it really, you feel that energy. So recollection of Kannon for me, by chanting, by just sitting, it's a direct route for me to embody loving kindness as I'm able. So I've got a little aside here, little story. When I was first ordained a priest by Zenku Sensei, when I returned back to my home in Oakland, and in my local sangha, which is called Kojinan, the abbot there, Akiba Roshi, who as Fusatsu mentioned, also ordained me, and my Dharma brother here I see, Ruki, at the same in the same ceremony. But Akiba Roshi's first words to me when I showed up in my new robes was, always remember the compassion of the Buddha. And the fact that he said this in very clear English to me was just blew me away. His English is pretty good, and it's better than my sagging Japanese. I'm trying to catch up, but he went direct that way. So it was a reinforcement of what Zenku Sensei had, what I received. So my gratitude for my teachers, all my teachers, and my Sangha, for patience and kindness and compassion. Yeah, I never forget this. So that's the compassion of the Buddha that I experience and am grateful for, and I always want to be aware of. So, onto the sutra itself. Kanzan, praise to Buddha. All are one with Buddha. All awake to Buddha. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Eternal, joyous, selfless, pure. Through the day, Kanzeon. Through the night, Kanzeon. This moment arises with mind. This moment itself is mind. So, line by line, you know, but the attitude, I'll go line by line, but in the attitude, I feel it's that this chanting is a concrete expression of Zazen practice. In Zazen, all are one with Buddha, all awake to Buddha. Zazen is eternal, joyous, selfless, and pure. Through the day Kanzeon, through the night Kanzeon is your Zazen practice manifesting in everyday life. This moment arises with mind, and this is concretely manifested in Zazen. This moment itself is mind. And again, this is concretely manifested in Zazen. So this kind of relates back to what I said near the beginning, which is a relationship with this Bodhisattva is established right away in Zazen practice. And then I ask the common question, then what Bodhisattva precept is not being observed in Zazen? So by dropping off body and mind in practice, this dynamic interdependence of all things is being actualized. So begins there, radiates that way. Dogen Zenji's universal recommendation for Zazen as eternal peace is concretely expressed in this way also. And by the way, Eihei, the Eihei in Eihei Dogen or Eihei-ji means eternal peace. Okay, so extending this into all activity, I find that it just happens naturally, organically, the more you practice. And it's an ongoing investigation, and consideration. It's really interesting. I'm just ad-libbing here. It's really interesting that when you sit regularly and you have a very consistent practice, how that manifests independent of your intention, really, it just happens. There's some times when I'm in traffic, or I'm in a line or something, or I'm just waiting, so-called, so to speak, waiting to go somewhere. And I find myself just getting recentered, finding that as an opportunity to just settle the mind. I don't do this perfectly or all the time, but I do remember to do that. And it really the posture, just sitting in this posture for however long, it's really it'll come out in your other activities. Sometimes I find myself when I take public transportation, I'm sitting there and my hands want to go into the mudra and just sit there without being ostentatious about it, but just it just kind of settles there. So it's been a good way to just settle wherever I am. So I try to remember that. So another way to look at extending into all activity, our Zazen practice, and given the ups and downs in our personal lives and those close to us and the suffering that's going on in the world, which is a fact of this world. But in the Metta Sutra, there are the lines, I'm going on another sutra now, the Metta Sutra. Even as a mother at the risk of her life watches over and protects her only child, so with a boundless mind should one cherish all living things. We cultivate the wisdom that knows interdependence through our Zazen. And the deeper we go into that, the deeper the understanding of no separation. And compassion naturally arises with this understanding. I can speak that, I can say that, you can listen to, but really, it's up to any of us to experience that. So words are words, but the concrete feeling of that I hope to convey in your or encourage in your practice, that the deeper we go into our practice, the deeper this no separation feeling in which compassion naturally arises. Okay, and so even though we have no separation, which is the reality of interdependence, we also have the relative in this equation, in this situation. In this aspect is very important too. We have individual physical bodies and we have myriad circumstances that impel our experience in this life. This consideration of the relative is indispensable too, in the reality of the harmony of absolute and relative. So with a with a boundless mind, we should cherish all living things. And that word things is not used accidentally. That's, I feel, these are individual manifestations, expressions of our true nature, our true nature. And watching over and protecting as a mother protects her only child, like a focus on this only child. So there's there's an aspect of harmony of absolute and relative in this, and that's another talk and another 10 years of practice. But I want to just put that out there. Another way I see that line, or these lines of even as a mother at the risk of her life watches over and protects her only child, so with a boundless mind should one cherish all living things. Another way I see that is that my practice needs watching and protection in this way too. The vows, essentially. So with that, I'm reminded of stories that I've heard of Chinese monks and of their great practice of wisdom and compassion. I should say Tibetan monks and their relationship with their Chinese captors. Recall reading one or two monks saying that the condition that they feared most in their situation of captivity by the Chinese authorities was the loss of their compassion and wisdom. That's something that I can only imagine to aspire to, that type of practice of compassion and wisdom. But the vow is there nonetheless. Their situation is it's still going on too. So not forget the Tibetans either, please. This leads me to kind of another recollection of something that happened yesterday. So I was talking with my good friend here in Oakland. His name is Michael. He also practices Buddhism, and he also practices Taoism. So we always have great conversations. And of course, we talked about the current state of affairs and what our reflections on that were. And we got into Nelson Mandela too. Who I found another exemplar of wisdom and compassion and pragmatism. So the way Nelson Mandela was able to, in his dignified and skillful way, free others so that they may embrace their own freedom. And he knew that this freedom, which involved removing the oppressive force of the white racist regime, would not be complete without the white people shaking off their own fetters of racism. That was a key factor in the end of apartheid. So cherishing all living beings is not just a nice thing to aspire to. It's very pragmatic, and it's essential for our survival. And again, this is concretely manifested in our Zazen practice. So there's a lot to take in, so I appreciate your ears and attention and just being together. I'm going to get into a little bit of in the formal practice how I've found sound working and how in the formal sitting posture. And considering that Kannon Bodhisattva is the one who perceives sound, getting into this area of perception without excluding the others, but we're just looking at an aspect. We're coming at it for just one angle. But I have found in sitting, especially in the last year or two, that the busyness of my brain, it's a lot easier when I just open myself up to the omnidirectional field of sound that's happening always, moment by moment. So it's not to say that just focus on that sense consciousness. Everything, is ideally awake, when I'm just sitting there. but just settling into the posture with a strong feel in the mudra, while all manner of objects arise, but then this omnidirect, this field can really have a settling effect when it comes to taking a backward step, as we say, taking a backward step and no difference between subject and object. Sound is sound. I had a good question when I gave a similar talk a while ago. One of the Sangha members there said, is there sound? There's such thing. And I thought that was a great question. In fact, there was, in the Heart Sutra, no sound, no smell, no touch, etc. I don't know, one way I might say this, I think I wasn't satisfied with my answer, to be honest, at that time, but I had some time to consider. And I'd say now that if all things are interdependent, something manifests as sound. It's boundless sound. So no sound is boundless sound. I remember when usually every New Year's Day or New Year's Eve, we've done bell ringing ceremonies. Haruki-san and I have done this a few times at the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco. I just remembered this is what something Akiba Roshi said as well, which was someone asked him, what's the meaning of this bell? It's an old temple bell. It's hundreds of years old, very large, in a housing in this structure. You might have seen these. It's an old temple bell, the great bell, and 108 times it's rung. And I won't get into the tradition in detail of this ringing of the bell, but someone asked Akiba Roshi, what's the meaning of this? And he said it's the sound of the Buddha. So I really appreciate that too. Boundless sound. That's how I reflected on it later. So I really wanted to, I'm glad I remembered this boundlessness in this consideration of sound in our practice. So, and we have different situations of sound. We could be very quiet. In fact, Dogen Zenji's Fukan Zazengi, he says a quiet room is best. And I don't know about you, but that's not always possible. So we sit with what we have, but a quiet room is best. But if you live in a city, you live we work with that, or we find times in places where it's a little less active, shall we say. But I live in a place that's very active, so I've come to appreciate that. At night it calms down, but I live in a city where the Amtrak station is 2 blocks away. The Oakland airport is not far away, and there's people walking their dogs, or dogs walking their humans, and then there are boats, sirens, etc. So this plays into the field of sound that I sit with often, but not always. And then there's a rural practice that's very beneficial too, in terms of getting away from the hubbub and just being able to really deeply settle. Sound happens there too, but there's a deep silence. That's a dynamic sound too. Um, so I'll just leave it there. But urban, rural, they both have their benefits in my experience. So I hope that you've come to see the same. So that we're talking about sound and that faculty. I do want to consider those who don't have that faculty. You know, the deaf community, practitioners that don't have the use of their hearing. So starting to investigate this a little bit, and I found a blog page. Actually, it's on the San Francisco Zen Center's website by I don't know if he's still a resident priest there, but his name is Keith Baker, and he is I believe he became profoundly deaf while a resident there. So he's had to work with how to navigate, navigate everything afresh, like start start over. So I wanted to quote from him a little bit here. He says, "We are creatures of body and mind, and deafness has shown me that the two are not really separate at all. The term sense aggregates is more than just an intellectual concept now. With the perception of sound gone, it is much clearer how tightly it was interconnected with the other senses. The assemblage of my senses work differently. Sight is changed to pay more attention to movement in what I watch. Seeing people getting up from meditation takes the place of hearing the gong. Deafness is pressing me to begin over again and change the way I think and act, both habitually and cognitively. One of the hallmarks of our practice is to learn to do things mindfully and with attention. Walking, talking, and our myriad mundane activities are all brought under the umbrella of mindfulness. With sudden deafness, all these activities are no longer supported or checked by hearing." End quote. So if we're talking compassion and Kannon, it would do well for me, speaking for myself, to understand the experience of someone who doesn't have the faculty of hearing. So it's really interesting to hear. I'd like to hear more of how his assemblage of senses work differently. Another thing I saw him mention in this blog was that when sign language is used in the formal practice day, in and around the Zendo, that's considered speech. So if there's times when speech is not encouraged in terms of just functional speech, just use functional speech, that's signing is also considered speech, which makes sense. So I'm getting near the end of our consideration here. So talking about kind of having Zazen or seeing Zazen manifest outside the Zendo and compassion manifesting outside the Zendo, off the cushion. And and compassion in all activity, or perceiving the sounds of the world. That's a little area I'm going to talk about last. So as I aspire to practice like Kannon, I recall Dogen Zenchi's phrase, playing freely in Samadhi. And for me, that phrase has meant faith in the practice and the discipline of practice, and its expression in a natural, unforced, and uninhibited way, Buddha way. It just comes out. And I'm going to bring in my musical experience and to relate that, and an example of discipline and expression. John Coltrane is a favorite and revered by many, including myself, musician, iconic musician, jazz saxophonist. So using John Coltrane as an example, he was very disciplined in his practice of music. He had his horn with him all day. He was running scales, different modes, and doing experimentations, really exploring every angle of his instrument, every sound. So he had his horn with him all the time. When it came time to hit the stage or the studio, he just expressed his whole being uninhibitedly and with a devotion to his understanding of universal being in every note. But he wouldn't have had time to really pay attention to every single note, in every single instance. This is beyond the intellect. He just played. And that came out of his disciplined practice. So I understand Zazen practice is both the discipline and the playing. It's just sitting, just being. So in Zazen, I found that dropping off the busy brain is easier when there's, an opening to this field of sound that arises moment to moment, and that recalling Kannon as the perceiver of sounds of the world and chanting is a direct way to practice loving kindness in all my activities, all of them. So it's not a matter of being good or bad at this. It's what matters is the vow, and the intention, and remembering if there's something is out of tune. So yeah, I think that will conclude my long talk here, but I really appreciate your listening, your ears, and your presence and your examples for me as a practitioner. So with that, I will say thank you for listening.
Kanzan-san, thank you so much, as always, for your insight and your wisdom. And to the Sangha, online and in the room, this is an opportunity for us to respond, ask questions, and participate in this dialogue with the Sangha. So I'm just going to open it up. So if you're online, just come off and please comment. If you're in the room, just raise your hand and I'll throw the mic to you. We have somebody inside.
Hi, Sangha. Thank you for that talk.
Thank you.
My name is Michael, and I like the things you said about sound. I was a musician in high school and college, and I don't practice anymore, but I also listen to all variety of music for my whole adult life. And I noticed that with sound, one biological aspect of sound is that the ears adapt to sound, especially sounds that you hear every day and at certain times. So it takes a lot of concentration or attention to hear those sounds again. And when you hear those sounds, for example, at my house, I'll have the window open and I'll hear the birds in the morning and the evening. And after a while, I don't hear them anymore. And I think, well, where did they go? And then I have to try with great attention, and then I hear them again. And when I hear sounds, when I really listen, it's different from hearing. When you listen and that person inside you is gone, there's no thought, that's when I feel the emptiness. That's when it's like, so it's not about the sound anymore. It can be any sound or noise. It doesn't matter. It's not about that. It's about reaching that emptiness inside you where you're the emptiness. I just want to share that.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. I really appreciate that, Michael. That reminds me of, this give and take, or giving, receiving, subject object equation. But what you said reminds me of the phrase, the emptiness of giver, receiver, and gift. So yeah, I appreciate that, because when we really settle into this practice and we get a feeling for dropping off body and mind and dropping off subject and object, that becomes manifest. It's just this moment is itself mind. So thank you for sharing that.
Hello, Sangha. Hello, our community, and Michael. Thank you. I really appreciate Michael sharing that. My name is Pearl again. And I remember back 2 years ago when I came to the monastery in Vietnam, and I was not very well in my practice of mindfulness. So I was hurry, like walking in the kitchen and walking really fast. And the vice abbot stopped me right in the middle of the kitchen and told me to stand still, and just giving very simple direction in the middle of my task, like stand still, feel your feet, feel the air around you, close your eyes and open your ears, listen to all the sounds and feel your breath and really feel everything alive. And that moment, I'm like, wow, what a magical moment to really feel everything alive. Just that simple bringing attention, awareness to everything within and around. And so I adopt that as my listening practice, listening meditation. And through the years, I have found that listening, like Michael said, that when we really listen to every sound and extending, really make an intention to extend our ears to open and receptive to all the sounds around us, then it becomes like a vacuum, an open space that you are embracing all the sounds, including the beautiful sound and the harsh sounds, and not having any judgment to the sounds. And that brought to my mind is the ability to embracing all the joy and the sorrow of the world as we listen. And as a chaplain in the hospital, I'm a Buddhist chaplain, and a lot of our skill is deep listening with empathy. And I found that when I listen to my patients, from different religious backgrounds, and some of them even criticize Buddhism in front of me. And as I just listen to them and really hear the deep pain and really hear under the words, what it is I kind of shut away my own but just to connect with the patient with my total presence, and like you, what you said, the receiver and the giver kind of all become one. And when that become one, then you can see the pure compassion, the feeling of real joy and love and connection in that moment. I really appreciate your talk today.
Thank you for those words, Sister Pearl. I really appreciate what you just said too. And I liked what you said about, among other things, the deep listening practice that you do. And one thing I probably didn't get into what I spoke on was that deep listening doesn't necessarily depend on ears or sound. You know, deep listening could be a look in someone's eye, you know. So there's many expressions and many aspects of listening. So I thank you for sharing that, Sister Pearl. All right. Yeah, good to see some. I see some people.
Thank you very much for that talk. I think it's very, it's certainly very timely, especially given the events in the world. And I appreciate you sort of widening our view about all the other conflicts that are going on. I was thinking, as we were sitting here, about Michael commenting that if we don't pay attention, that the sounds, that we only hear the sounds in the morning and the evening of the birds. I was thinking it's kind of similar with the conflicts in the world. We sort of become, or I'll speak for myself, I sort of become numb, and I appreciate you bringing up all the other conflicts that are going on in the world, because like the sound, it's sort of like, this is the bird that's chirping right next to our ear, right? Ukraine. I wonder, in your experience, I think maybe one of the concerns that we might have, maybe unconscious or conscious, is that we're going to be overwhelmed by the suffering in the world. And even though it's quite an amazing aspiration to become, maybe to point in a direction toward Avalokiteshvara, the more we become aware of the suffering in the world, there's sort of, multiple responses. But from a personal standpoint, it seems like we're more connected to the world than we've ever been, and there's a lot more suffering in the world that we can't do anything about, maybe, perhaps, than there was hundreds of years ago, when the suffering that you came in contact with was suffering in your immediate surroundings, mostly, right? And now we see it, we have more of a concept of the suffering in the world. And I was just wondering, in your speaking about this, if you have any comments that might be helpful for us in our practice.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that also occurred to me too. So we could say we're hyper connected in a way. And when I said earlier that watching over and protecting, as a mother protects her only child, I also, this isn't meant to sound selfish, but we have to take care of our own physical bodies and our spirits too. If we're going to do this Bodhisattva way, we have, resilience is going to matter, obviously, because we vow this way to keep staying in this realm, but not to get overwhelmed. So this is why I appreciate my teachers who exemplify Bodhisattva activity and Bodhisattva vow with a degree of lightness and humor. That's important. We can't get overwhelmed with, there is joy in the world too, not just suffering. So I wanted to, it's not just one thing or the other. But we do have to take care of ourselves to do this practice. So I hope that helps. Thank you.
Ungen Sensei, I see you off of mute. Did you have a comment? Ungen Sensei, are you off of mute? Did you have a comment?
Actually, I do. How did you know?
Mhm.
It seems to me, hearing the cries of the world, Avalokiteshvara, Bodhisattva, so profound. I think hearing the sounds is understanding the sounds. Hearing the sounds is understanding, the suffering. And to understand, is to be illuminated, awakened. And so I think, as challenging as these times are, and the pictures we see on the TV, are disturbing, I think having a deep understanding of human suffering, but I agree with Kanzan not to be, we can't let it weight us down. Our spirit, we must, from this insight around suffering, we must be inspired. And, the Ukrainian people have been very inspirational in this regard. So anyway, Kanzan, thank you so much for your words. I wondered if you could say more about that, about Kanzan and hearing the sounds of the world and a deep understanding of the sounds of the world and what that means without emotionally getting all caught up. Deeper understanding.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Senku Sensei. Yeah, and thank you for what you brought up there. I'm coming to understand, and what I mentioned in the beginning is that what I'm trying to investigate in practice is what is a bodhisattva? What is bodhisattva activity, more accurately? And like you said, a deep understanding is part of this, and it's not just dependent on one sense of hearing, literally, but that's how I've come to understand, hearing the sounds of the world or hearing the cries of the world, as you said just now, is just an understanding of suffering and its cause, and compassion is the emptiness of compassion too, in the terms of what I tried to express in my rudimentary way of the emptiness of giver and receiver, of subject and object. This can't be intellectualized. This has to be actualized, and we've learned this by Zazen. So that's probably the best I can expound on that. So, but thank you for that. Thank you, Sensei.
Thank you, Kanzan. And Ungen Sensei, sorry, I meant to make sure are you able to come off mute to speak now?
Yes, now I'm ready. Thanks a lot for your talk. I really appreciate it. Chanting, very important to my practice. The way I first was taught to approach chanting was Rinzai tradition, Edo Roshi up at ASZC Zendo. And we learned the Kannon Sutra in the Sino-Japanese. And we would chant it. We'd do 21 repetitions. The first one would be very slow and soft, and it would increase in volume and frequent. And by number 21, particularly up in New York with all those young Yankee practitioners, they were literally screaming. But the result of that was your mind was suddenly free of all the monkey world, and you were focused on what you were doing sitting right there. And then my next one is another Rinzai teacher, Sandy Stewart, Gente Stewart over at the North Carolina Zen Center. His approach to chanting was again using the Sino-Japanese, but he would repeatedly say, don't ever worry about what the words mean.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Give yourself to the chanting, get out of your small mind and
Mhm.
focus. So those are two different little approaches.
Mhm.
Thanks
Ex-
again for being with us.
Thank you, Ungan. I really appreciate what you just said. And that's a very, very important, very key. I wanted to get into that too. I mean, Dharanis, the Kannon Sutra is not a Dharani, but other chants are Dharanis, or we can call them magical sounds in a way. Daihishin Dharani. I like this one in the phonetic Japanese is Namu Kara Tano Tonsha Namushikiri Toimo Oriya Borikichi Shifaraya Fuji. You just get into this movement and this energy, and that's what, like you said, that's what takes you out of your discriminating thinking, and it's just you and this moment itself is mind. That's how I experienced that. So thank you for sharing that. I think that's very important.
Thank you.
Again, Kanzan, this is Fusats. Again, thank you so much for your teaching as always. One of the things that I did, as I pinged you, you said, "What's your topic?" It was very insightful, and then the next week all this stuff broke out. But again, thank you for the recognition of violence, suffering throughout the world. Ukraine and beyond. One does not take or negate the other. I really appreciate the ability to be able to, again, as she said, when you see something just so blatantly, just, that's causing a suffering, you cannot not, know and
Right.
feel that. One of the things that you said, and I think Sensei Zenku mentioned too, when everything really started coming out and we started seeing these massive images, as a Bodhisattva, I know that you had said that you used the Kannon Sutra, you wanted to really kind of delve into that as a part of your practice. For me, it was very interesting to hold the contrast of being at work and knowing all of this is going on, being just normally going through our day-to-day activities and knowing this is going on, and not feeling it, allowing myself to feel it, the emotions of it, because for me, one of the things that you mentioned was the hearing, and then you also talked about the deaf practitioner or the deaf priest and how he responded to not being able to hear. But the hearing beyond the actual faculty of the ear, and the hearing and the feeling and the suffering of the world is beyond senses, from my perception, beyond sight, beyond sound, beyond feeling, touch, whatever. Can you speak a little bit about how you, in your practice, even before the Ukraine, but knowing that a lot of things were coming out in the world in general, as a practitioner and in your Bodhisattva practice, holding the contrast, holding it beyond the sense perception. What does that really look and feel like in your day-to-day practice?
What do you mean by holding the contrast? If you can I get a little more?
Yeah, I mean,
on that?
you see, and it's really not a contrast because it's not
Right.
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 So that's kind of where I was having you go. You already went there, but it really, you're at work, you're on conference calls, and somebody's being bothered.
Oh yeah, right,
right. You're just going through your day-to-day activities, but that's what I mean by being in the moment of it. That makes sense. You already went exactly with your question where I wanted you to go, so I just wanted to see if you had any additional comments on that.
Oh, thank you, Fusats. Yeah, well, again, we live in the reality of interdependence. So what seems as not connected will be connected, but how that is not always apparent, and often not apparent. I think a good reason why there's a part of the Eightfold Path called right livelihood, so that we can remember, even as we earn our livelihoods, we are definitely not adding suffering to the world. So, so even though that strife is happening elsewhere, and then you're, at the office. It's, we don't have to, get, we don't have to feel bad for having a condition where we're able to practice. But that's why we have a vow, is that since if we're fortunate to have this condition in which to practice, then we practice fully. That's that's what I aspire to. And so I'm sure you do good work in the world and for your livelihood. And I'm sure a lot of us do. So we can take heart in that regard. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Kanzan-san.
Hojo-san, how are you doing? I haven't talked to you in a little while.
I haven't checked this morning. I don't know yet.
Okay.
I think I'm fine.
Okay, good.
I'm
Well,
always recovering.
Yeah, you look well. I'm glad to see you.
Thank you. I do have something to say if I should go ahead and say. It seemed to me that the internet, the arc of technology, is to raise consciousness around the world. One part of it. And that's why people shut down their internet right away when they have a conflict like this. So if you're familiar with the Jungian concept of noosphere, it was something like world consciousness. And that was way before, I think, it was glimmering in anybody's eye of the internet. But basically, it seems to me the internet started manifesting that Jungian noosphere. And similarly, I think the camera in every pocket now illustrates the Kanzan in the sense of the all-seeing, all-hearing one. Kanji Zai, Kanzeon, Kannon, they all have slightly different, I think, takes on. But in the koan, I'm reaching behind to find the cushion in the night, and the eyes of Kanzeon being throughout the body, etc. I think these are metaphors or analogies for we're becoming conscious on a global scale. And so what do we see? What does the all-seeing one see? So now we have moment by moment record of human ignorance in action, where for whatever reasons Vladimir Putin, I wouldn't use the word chose to do this. I don't even know if he knows he has a choice. And so you get into kind of a deep dialogue there about how this actually happens. But Buddhism, I think, would simply define it as ignorance. Massive, massive ignorance on a massive scale. And I don't think Buddha would be surprised. He could see as far as the horizon, in those days. Now we see all over the world by virtue of the technology. So it's as if Kanzeon has become manifest around the world. It must be like billions of eyes in terms of, pocket camera that everybody has these days. So now we're forced to see it. In Buddha's time, I think you could only see as far as the horizon. And before Buddha, all of these ideas developed. So now I think we're witnessing the growth of consciousness around the globe, and part of that is Buddha's awakening. What you awaken to is illusion. What you awaken to is ignorance. And so it's not a happy thing necessarily. But if everybody came to this awakening, maybe you could have world peace and people would not be acting out of ignorance and causing such suffering to others. People are causing all the suffering in the world. So I thought from an abstract perspective, I thought it might ask you to speak of the idea of dukkha as being simply change. That is, any sound you hear is the product of some kind of change.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're hearing is the sound of dukkha. You're hearing the sound of change, if it's no matter what sound it is. Similarly, everything you see is a product of change. So dukkha, in the most universal and neutral sense, I think, is just change. And we're caught up in it. And you have to question why a guy 60, 70 years old like Putin is struggling so hard to do something that's so damaging to so many people and cannot possibly benefit him, at least not for more than 10 or 20 years. And you can excuse it based on belief systems. You know, he's going to go to heaven, or I don't know, who knows what he believes. And that's the great contrast between Buddhism and other so-called religions, is it's not based on belief, it's based on action, consequences, reality. So from that perspective, I think we can look at dukkha, suffering, as a universal principle, which cannot be avoided, but it can be mitigated. The kind of suffering in the sutra, no suffering, no end of suffering, given emptiness, means that natural suffering, aging, sickness, and death is built in. There's no end to that.
Mm-hmm.
But, unnecessary suffering or inflicting suffering on ourselves, as you've been speaking of, through kind of blaming yourself beyond what you can be responsible for, or blaming others and inflicting suffering on others. That's the kind of suffering that can come to an end through Buddhism. But I'm not sure it's going to happen. Doesn't look like it. Meanwhile, you got the damage to the planet is sneaking up on us from behind.
Well, thank you, Hojo-san. I mean, even though I brought up the Saha world at the very beginning, this reality of endurance, strife, patience, as the ground where the Buddha teaches, the Buddha wouldn't have to teach where there is no clinging, where there is no clinging to what is impermanent. So, yeah, I appreciate very much what you said about the sound or phenomena, or as dukkha, or as impermanence, or as change. So given that, that's why I think that's why I'm starting to get a deeper appreciation for how things arise in the moment, and paying attention to this moment, because this moment is not happened exactly before and will not happen exactly again. And you can't grasp present moment. You can't grasp past moment, and you can't grasp future moment either. So there's nothing to grasp. Given that, there's somewhere in there is the end of suffering. And that's the mystery I vow to investigate. That's all I can really say. So, but that's, yeah, thank you, Hojo-san.
And again, folks online, if you would like to come off of, if you have comments, please do. And Kanzan-san, I got to meet your brother, your Dharma brother, online at another last semester. He's was in our IBS intro course. So I was so happy to know that he knew you, and I was just like, I love Kanzan. So it's great. It's actually great to see you. So welcome.
Yes, it's great to see everyone, and grateful to see my Dharma brother with Akiba Roshi, Ruki, Tom Hawkins here too. And yes, he mentioned that. Yeah. So,
And Joseph, I see your hand up. Can you come off of mute for me?
Yeah, I know we're coming up on noon, so I really just wanted
take your time, Joseph. No, it's all good.
I really just wanted to say thank you, Kanzan, for your inspiring and profound teaching today. And one of the things I was struck by is the cherish all living things with a boundless mind, which and you sort of compared it to the vows, and there was sort of an unsaid syllogism where the vow was a living thing and like something we had to, it was like essential to survival.
mhm.
I don't know, I guess I was just wondering if you could talk a little more about, it felt connected to this point about like we have to learn poetry by heart. It's like in signless immersion of the heart that we find the harmony and freedom that are essential to survival. Sorry, maybe I'm like putting words in your mouth too. I realize you didn't say all that quite so explicitly, but yeah.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Joseph. I think, again, I mean, I'm going to bring in my musical experience again. And when I say cherishing all living things, that can only happen, it feels like that can only happen when there is no barrier of subject and object. I keep coming back to that point. Even though there, in the absolute, no subject and object, there is relative too. So we understand this, we recognize the relative. But dropping off, just dropping off habitual thinking. Not that we don't need thought, it has its place, but dropping off habitual thinking at the right times is how we have this visceral connection. We're not separate. We're all made of the same stuff. We all came out of the Big Bang. We're all connected, and we're all individual expressions of this unity. But when I bring in the music part, it involves, I play the drums. There have been times, I think my first Zen experiences, to be honest with you, as I look back, I find like when the drums were playing themselves, when I didn't think about what the next measure was, when the audience wasn't separate from me, when my instrument wasn't separate from me, and it was just happening in that moment. This could be translated into other areas, of course, but that's my experience as a performer. If I could, I think that's what I like to try to share. I don't know how that's done, but that's what I want to share with people. That whatever that dropping off is, that's where it's living. It lives there. This interdependence and compassion. So that comes with discipline. That comes with the discipline of practice too. So I just hope that conveys more or elaborates. Thank you for the question.
And Kanzan-san, a few comments from offline from Kuwa-san. She says, we sit with what we have. Gasho.
Yes, for sure. There can be there's no other way. That's the reality, for sure.
That's right. And then from Elizabeth Huey Levine, thank you so much. Deep listening when playing my sound bows brings focus and one pointed attention to the present moment when all outside noise is challenging. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
So again,
Great. Thank you for sharing those. Yes.
Definitely. I try to make sure, folks online get the comment too, but any last comments from the folks in the Hojo Sensei? I thought I saw your hand up. Shishiki?
Okay.
Kanzan, as always, my Dharma, our Dharma brother, thank you so much for your wisdom and just your being. You hold the practice in your presence in your body, and you share that with others so freely. So we're so grateful to have you speak today, and just so glad to have you as a Dharma brother in our Sangha. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's good. And it goes both ways, always, to be sure.
We feel you.
Yeah.
Just a few, again, as always, we have, I know Hojo Sensei has an item that he'd like to discuss, but next Sunday is our second Sunday community practice. We're back, Shinjin Sensei and myself will be leading that conversation. We are, again, continuing the conversation and the study of the Paramitas. We'll be talking Sila, which, again, as you know, is morality, or however that you want that translated. So please, as always, we'll circle up, have the conversation. And then have an open conversation about what that really looks like in real time. We do have Ryaku Fusatsu tomorrow at 7 o'clock online, so please join if you can. And as always, there's always opportunities to practice. As Kanzan said, it's keep coming back to what Hojo Sensei says, just sit still enough, long enough. And we do that. We have a lot of opportunities to sit still and for a long period of time. So with our Sangha, so we always are appreciative for that. And Hojo Sensei, I'm gonna got an item, and then I'll again, as always, say gratitude for your offerings. But Hojo Sensei.
Yeah, just briefly, I want to assess interest in retreats now that we're hopefully coming out of the COVID. As we're coming out, hopefully coming out of the COVID isolation. People have been looking for retreat experience. And so I've come up with a document that Busatz will put in the chat so you can open it up or download it. And it illustrates and describes a retreat Friday evening, all day Saturday, and Sunday morning. I'm proposing for fourth Sundays in the upcoming. So the first one will be at the end of April, and the last one will be in November. So there would be 8 altogether, depending on interest. So I'd like you to just take a look at that document and get back to me by email, and let me know if if you're interested in attending either online or coming to Atlanta. It's going to be limited for those who can come to Atlanta, obviously. And we may limit it to attendance of 12 people at a time, something like that. But it's a very different, it's kind of an urban retreat. It's 50-minute periods of sitting, 10 minutes walking. And it's all 7 to 9 Friday evening, p.m., 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Saturday, and 7 to 9 a.m. on Sunday. And then it wraps around the regular schedule when I do the contemporary Dharma talk on Sundays. So it's all fourth weekends, fourth Sundays, which will make it convenient for me. And I'll send you take a look at the sheet of document that Busatsu attached. We're doing it a little differently. It's kind of like a no-frills type of approach. It's not going to require support in terms of promotion and things like that online. It's all going to be done just in email with myself. Okay?
Okay. Thank you. All right.
Ready to go?
Good to hear.
One more?
One more.
This is Pearl again, and also aligned with the retreat. I've been holding monthly retreats, mindfulness day practice for children and their parents. It's like a family event where parents and children come and relax and have mindfulness games and sitting meditation, walking meditations, and enjoying mindfulness meal together. So that would be on the 26th of Saturday, 26th of this month, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And at the Kim Kang Monastery. And I can share with Fasasa to put it online for people to have more details.
Okay. Thank you.
And as always, I cannot leave without, again, expressing gratitude for those who are already contributing to our Sangha. Again, we are able to continue what we do, even through the pandemic, only because of the giving and that you provided us. So we are so grateful for that. And we are to be able to be alive through the pandemic, and also looking forward to expanding out, as Hojo Sensei just mentioned. So again, if you found value in what we do, we ask that you please consider supporting us. And again, thank you so much for your presence and your practice. And without further ado, we'll go ahead and do our closing Dharma verses. But again, everybody, thank you so much. And Kanzan, so very grateful for your talk this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Beings are numberless, I vow to freedom, delusion inexhaustible, I vow to end them, Dharma gates are bound, I vow to enter them, the Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them, delusions are exhaustible, I vow to end them, Dharma gate are boundless, I vow to enter them, Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize. Being numberless, I vow to free them, delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them, Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them, Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it.
Sangha, be safe, be well. Thank you so much for your practice and your presence. And again, just keep on sitting. Folks, thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone. Really great to see you practice with everyone. Thank you all.